Today's guest is Jeff Matauch. I've known Jeff for over 30 years. Jeff originally was a painter who later became a trainer, and he rose the ranks in PPG, becoming a world-famous automotive educator and trainer in the world of paint and body. We're going to talk a lot about restoration and custom cars, but mainly the reason why I wanted to have Jeff on the show today, I wanted to open up the world of auto body paint and body, because there's very few people in the country who has the knowledge that Jeff Matauch has. All right, welcome back to another episode of Automotive Legends. I'm Gary. As always, David's behind the mic. Today we have a special guest. We have Jeff Matauch. Thanks for joining us today. Appreciate you. The first question we ask everybody, well, at least we try to ask everybody, is what was your very first car, year, make, and model?
My very first car was a 65 Mustang Fastback.
What color was it?
Well, when I bought it, it was red, $375 rusted turd. And I was 15 when I bought it, and had a bunch of work done on it. It's actually kind of what got me into painting cars, because I couldn't afford to pay anybody to work on it, so I just figured out how to do it myself, you know. And it ended up being like a burnt orange.
Yeah. How long
like
did
copper?
How long did you own that car?
Probably, I bought it in 76, so it wasn't that old of a car, but it was rusted to hell.
Yeah.
And I think I probably sold it about 84, 85.
Think it's still out there, or no? Or what's the last thing that you heard about it?
Well, I sold it. I had redid it, and I didn't like the way it came out, so I did it again, and I still didn't like it. So then I took it back apart, and I never got it back together again.
Wow.
And I sold it apart. It's the only car I've ever not completely finished. So I sold it, and the guy turned it into a race car, put a 460 in it, ran it at the drag strip, and then he sold it to somebody else, and I saw it at Autorama.
Wow.
And the guy was actually wanting to sell it.
Yeah.
You know, and I was like, you know, I don't really think I want to go back there again, you know.
Yeah.
Well, then it ended up getting rolled.
Oh, okay.
And apparently it's sitting in a field in Dexter somewhere.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
It's a good place for that.
Yeah,
Good place
yeah.
for it. So do you think that car had a role in getting you into the automotive industry?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I was into it before that.
Yeah.
You know, I have an older brother. He's 6 years older than I am, and he's always had cars, you know, and we still do to this day. And that kind of got me into it a little bit.
What was your first automotive job?
I worked at a detail shop
Awesome.
in Plymouth.
Okay.
And it was, you know, where they do polishing and details, and, you know, here you're in the shop and it's dark as hell, and you're trying to get the interior clean and everything else, and then the guy pulls it outside and says, "This sucks, you did a terrible job." I go, "Dude, get me some lights," you know?
Yeah. Yeah, the shops were definitely dark back in those days. It's funny now watching the internet when they call it paint correction. They got all these fancy lights and fancy equipment. You know, how fast this industry has evolved. What did the detailing lead to, like the paint side of things?
Yeah, actually, they did a bunch of work for one of the local body shops that's no longer around, and I ended up getting a job there.
Okay.
Started out there as a porter, and then kind of started getting into the paint shop. And
what kind of paint were they using back in those days?
Well,
probably not base coat, clear coat, was it?
Well, they used lacquer and enamel.
Okay.
And a lot of times the lacquer, they'd put urethane clear over the top of it.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, on custom jobs.
Yeah.
You know, they'd put the old DAU 75.
And then, so you were doing more like collision dealership stuff. What led you to the jump into like the custom and restorations?
Well, I always liked taking an old turd and making it into something nice.
Yeah.
You know, and I always got into custom painting, flames, stripes. You know, I always enjoyed doing that.
You like the artistic side of it, you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, to some point. I like taking something that's nasty and making it really nice.
Yeah.
You know, really, really slicking it out and making it real pretty.
You build models and stuff when you were a kid?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I started building models, I was probably 7 or 8 years old.
That's a common theme with like OCD painters, especially from our generation.
It's unbelievable, because you take a model car and you'd visualize what you'd want it to look like, and I'd paint. I was the idiot that put spark plug wires and brake lines, and you know, and every once in a while I'll still do one, and I do all that crap, and the exhaust had to be this color and the underside had to be this color. And I'm talking when I'm 9, 10 years old, I'm doing this kind of crazy crap, and it just kind of led into, I'm still doing it. I'm just doing bigger cars.
It teaches though, like the order of operations and how to be methodical. Like, cause I'm sure you've done this.
How to read directions.
Yeah. Like I'm sure you've done this is, you're gluing something together and you have a little glue on your finger and you touch the glass.
Oh yeah, everybody's done that.
And it's like, you learn. Like, that glass is gone, or I'm tinting the windows or whatever. I don't know if kids nowadays build model cars, but
not too much.
Yeah, our generation. I mean, you could tell how OCD someone was, and I mean that in a good way. Of if they could follow directions, if they were willing to put the hard work in, because I'm a big believer in how you do anything is how you do everything.
Yeah.
And if you're a hack doing model cars, you're probably a hack building cars.
Probably.
And I mean, there's exceptions to the rule, but I think that's true.
Yep. Between model cars and Hot Wheels.
So didn't you jump and you start selling paint for a while at A&L in Ann Arbor?
Painter Supply.
It was Painter Supply?
Yeah, I painted for about 15 years in shops, and I was in a couple shops where I did custom work, restorations. And then I moved over to Painter Supply, and I did that for about 6 years.
Okay.
And then
the Ann Arbor location, right?
I was in Warren for about 4 years, and then I was in Warren 2 years, Ann Arbor 4 years.
I still remember back in the day when I was probably 18 years old, I bought some factory packs for a Mustang for me that was either DBC or maybe even DBU in those days. Man, it was DBC.
Well, DBC's been around since about 1990.
Yeah, so I remember I bought 2 like quart factory packs. Like, oh man, we don't even have to mix it here. It's mixed from the factory. Like,
wow.
What's that mean? Like, okay. And then after you left Painter Supply, where'd you end up going? PPG.
Yeah.
And what was your job at PPG?
I ran the training center in Wixom.
Okay.
Did that for 24 years.
24 years.
Yep.
Wow. And now you're retired?
No, I'm retired.
So,
kind of.
Are you golfing now, or?
No. I have enough aggravation in my life. I don't need to add to it.
You still building cars?
Absolutely.
What you got going on right now?
65 Mustang convertible.
Another Mustang?
Yeah, I like that Mustang. Yeah. I think out of all the cars I've done, I've probably done more Mustangs than anything.
What is it about the Mustang that is like, including myself, I'm a Chevy guy, but I'm not dissing on the Mustang. The Mustang is in my opinion the ultimate pony car, and it's one of the ultimate like cars to own. I don't care if you're a first time builder or if you're an experienced builder, but what is it about the Mustang that draws so many people in?
It's just an all around. You can do whatever you want with it. I mean, look at back when they first started selling them. You could either buy a 6-cylinder granny car, or you could buy a 289 hypo, that was at the time was a pretty fast car. Today it's not considered that fast, but I mean, look, you can take that car, it weighs 2,500 pounds. The one I'm working on is basically 2,500 pounds, and you put a stroker 347, which is what's going in it, or they put these Coyote motors and things like that, 700, 800 horsepower, and they just scream. They're unbelievably fast. You know
that guy, Paul's High Performance up near Jackson?
Yeah.
All right. He's putting, with a factory lower, they're putting like 1,000 horsepower to the ground out of that 5.0 Coyote. Like it's nothing.
Yeah.
And it's like...
Doesn't take much anymore, Technology's an amazing thing sometimes.
I mean, 20 years ago, if someone would tell me, like, hey, my dad owns a car with 1,000 horsepower, like, oh, a drag car? Like, no, a street car. I'm like, nah. Like, you don't even know anybody that has... I mean, they were out, but
when I was in high school, if you had a 13-second car, you were a badass.
Yeah.
Really.
Absolutely.
Now, if you don't run 9s, go home.
I know, right? I mean, it's crazy how much we've advanced in the last, 10 or 20 years. The one thing that always got me about the Mustang is, the pony car thing was, it's a light, small car, like you said, but it's got a big motor in it. A lot of people think like pony car, it's, because a Mustang's a horse, it's a pony. That's got nothing to do with it. It's the light, small car with the big motor. But the story that I always liked about the Mustang was that car was never supposed to be like the ultimate pony car. It was designed for secretaries. It was a woman's car originally.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's where they got the whole term pony car, because it was a Mustang. And then you had the Camaro and the Challenger and AMX and, everything else came after that. But
yeah,
that was the one that started it.
But
and is still made today.
Yeah, it's still made today, and it's arguably one of Ford's most successful vehicles. Still this day after all these years.
Yeah,
and like again, being a Chevy guy, and I think this might be true still in 2024. If you wanted to buy a rear-wheel drive V8 American muscle car and like dollar for dollar, what should you buy? And I'll admit the Corvette's king, but I mean, what's a Z06 now? 150 grand?
Yeah, they're insane.
Like, you could go buy a Mustang for 50 grand and brand new, nicely equipped. And later in life, you could throw $10,000 into it and it would probably beat 90% of the cars out there.
I like working on them too, because they're small.
Yeah.
They're simple.
Yeah.
That quarter's a lot easier to block out than
64 Impala.
Yeah. 64 Impala.
60 Cadillac.
60 Cadillac. 62 Bonneville.
The parts too, though, is, I mean, there's a lot more support out there. If you're trying to find parts, let's say for a Tucker or a 53 Cadillac Eldorado, that's really tough. But if you needed
or even a 67 Coronet, good luck finding parts for that.
But if you needed a fender for let's say a 67 Eleanor car, they make, there might be some NOS or new old stock out there. Might be.
Yeah, there's a pretty fair amount of that out there. They made so many of those cars,
But then there would be low-end aftermarket, middle-of-the-road aftermarket, and then really, really high-end aftermarket, too.
There's some good stuff out there.
Yeah.
And it's getting better. As time goes on, the aftermarket stuff seems to get better and better.
So one of the reasons why we wanted to bring you on is, in my head, is not only are you a car guy and you're in paint and body has always been your area of expertise, is that your role at PPG is in my mind, you were a teacher. Like, I know that wasn't your official job title. You were a trainer or whatever. Instructor. But I'm in the world of education, and me and my buddies, we would go to you to actually get our knowledge, so then we could go back and teach the next generation. So you were actually teaching the teachers. And, like when you would do, you would just discuss different topics or your slideshows. A lot of that stuff we'd steal.
Well, yeah, sure. That's the way you do it. You know?
And so like a lot of the stuff, like we would just take it and kind of clean it up. But, we learned a lot of good stuff from you. And one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast is there's a lot of information that we want to pass on to the next generation.
Sure.
And, you've been in it a long time, so we take for granted, like, what this means or what that means. So I wanted to go through a couple things with you and just have a basic definition or description on, like, different automotive sayings, because it's a lot of jargon. It's a lot of slang. It's confusing.
It is. I've often gotten into conversations with people that aren't really in the industry. They know a little bit about it, and it's like, dude, you're speaking a whole nother language.
Yeah.
When we start throwing numbers around and everything else, it
Absolutely
gets confusing.
So back in the day, there used to be like original cars and meaning that they weren't restored and they had their original paint, maybe their original numbers and original motor and all that. But people would always say, like, on the original cars, like, this car is numbers matching. What does that mean?
Numbers matching means that, see, there's a difference. They say numbers matching, or they could say numbers correct. There's two different terminologies there. Numbers matching means that just about every component that's on that car originally came on that car, from not just the engine, because usually, on a lot of cars, they would have the last 4 or 6 digits of the serial number from the car that would also be part of the engine. Not all cars are like that, but a lot of them are. That goes for the transmission. and any of the major components. And then they have numbers matching too. Would be the alternator is the original alternator. You know, usually when an alternator went bad, you took it to the auto parts store and exchanged it for another one, and it worked. You know, nobody gave a shit if it was the original one or not. But all that now for a numbers matching car matters. When you see these cars go across Barrett-Jackson for millions of dollars, typically those are the cars that have all that numbers matching.
The rarest of the rare.
The rarest of the rare. The rarest of the rare. Hemi, Cuda convertibles or whatever, you know.
So what do they mean by Survivor? Is that kind of mixed in there?
Yeah, Survivor's like the car's got probably 80 or 90% of its original stuff. You know, paint would have to be original. Interior would have to be original. You know, not necessarily always paint, because cars always got repainted, but it may have 50 or 60% of its original paint on it, you know.
You think anybody fakes that stuff or lies or stamps and serial numbers?
What do you think?
I actually heard that, and I don't know if it's true, is that there's more Hemi Mopars registered now than Chrysler ever built.
Well, it's easy to duplicate those things, but, you know, there's registries and stuff like Pontiac really has a, you know, their Pontiac registry. They can tell you exactly what that car is supposed to have. They have all the records, but not all the factories save that stuff. Or Ford's got the Marty report. That gives you a pretty accurate
What I liked about the
description.
The Pontiac one, what was it, PSA? Is that what they called it? I don't remember.
Yeah, I'm not positive.
Pontiac Society or a PAS, Pontiac Automotive Society.
Got a Pontiac. I should know that. But
the cool thing is, and I don't know what it's now, but like it was like a couple $100, but they would even mail me a copy of the original window sticker and stuff.
Well, so, yeah, that's documentation.
Yeah,
you know, cool. Anytime you can document a car like that, especially if you're going for originality, then it's always good to have that documentation. You know, and then you got numbers correct.
Okay,
numbers correct would be, okay, let's say you blew the engine up, but you found, you know, let's say you had a 67 GTO and you blew the original engine up, but if you could find an engine like a 400 that was the correct year and the serial numbers fell within the production date of that car, it would be considered numbers correct, not necessarily numbers matching.
Okay. So we got Survivor, we got the original, but then, you know, then we started, especially like after World War II with all the GIs and stuff coming back, you started to get like hot rods and customs. Like what's the lure or like the brief history behind hot rods and customs?
Man, that's a big definition.
It is a big one.
Well, I mean, back then a hot rod was they would take a Model T or a Model A and they'd pull the fenders off, and you know, they might take something and put a souped up flathead in it, you know, and that was considered a hot rod. And then the customs were like your chop tops, low riders, flamed out, stuff like that.
Okay, so the hot rods are more make them lighter, make them faster, and custom is more they make them look cool to you.
They go race them out on the salt flats or whatever, you know, and the customs were just low and slow, you know, and because now like, but it all kind of melded together, over the years, you know.
Because now, like, the big ones, like, I remember, I don't know, 20 years ago, whatever, the first time that I heard, like, pro touring. You know, like, oh, I'm building a pro touring car. And, I mean, you know, before it was, I have an original car, or I have a Survivor, or my car's restored, or my car's a custom, or my car's a hot rod. You know, I mean, there was other ones, but that was, like, the main 90% of the cars.
Well, I think it started with Pro Street, you know, where they make the car look like a pro stock car.
Yeah.
And they'd put the big wheels, tubs, and, you know, the giant wheels in the back and blower sticking out. But, you know, I'm kind of seeing a resurgence of that a little bit because of the whole nostalgia thing.
Yes.
But, man, those cars just back then, they weren't that practical. They were hard to drive. You know, they didn't handle well. But then the pro touring started to come into play, and that's where they had better suspensions and they could go around a corner, you know, and they started doing all this autocross and that type of thing. So that's the pro touring.
Yeah, and they could handle more like, I dare I say the European cars, which American cars for a long time were, we do quarter mile, straight line. We weren't known so much for cornering and lightweight and stuff like that. What about the resto mod? Like I always thought, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that, the resto mod it's restored. So you take an old car like your Mustang and you restore it, but then the mod was I modify it. And
they're just taking you like the looks of that old car, right? But you put more modern components in it to make it ride and handle like a newer car. Like a perfect example is the Mustang I'm doing.
Okay.
It's a 65 Mustang, and there's components on that car that make it a 65 Mustang. The grill, the trim, the emblems, the wheels, all that stuff, are specific to a 65 Mustang. And I wanted to keep that. Because I like 65 Mustangs, But let's face it, they rode and handle like crap.
Like driving a truck.
I mean, they're okay. They've got a certain charm to them, but if you really want to drive that car, now you update the suspension, update the brakes, put a bigger engine in it.
Maybe add AC.
Yeah, I'm not doing that. It's a convertible. What do I need AC for? Right. I don't live in Arizona. But yeah, you do that. Like the upholstery looks similar to the original, but the seats are better. They've got bigger bolsters and just that type of stuff. Yeah, that to
maybe
me that's
a cup holder, better stereo. I mean, whatever. I'm not saying your particular car,
right?
But like whatever you're into.
No, it's got cup holders.
Yeah, because like if like we sat down and let's say you did a list or I did a list or he did a list of like what's important in a car is. Hey, I want AC, I want an automatic, or I don't want
power windows, that type of thing.
So it's like it's tailor made to be built for your needs or your wants,
right?
Which I think is one of the reasons why they're so popular right now.
Yeah.
So for the guy who's wanting to, like let's say, here I am a dad and my son and me, we want to do a father-son project. Obviously, a Mustang might be a good choice of a car to attempt to do in our garage. Is there any other ones that like come to mind that aren't super? I mean, they're all expensive.
They're all expensive,
but they're not as expensive.
Anything I think that you can buy a decent amount of aftermarket parts for, if you need that, is a good place to go. Camaro, Firebird, There's a lot of Mopars now that have a pretty extensive amount of parts that you can buy. B bodies, Roadrunner, Super B.
Don't they seem to be a little bit more expensive to build and a little harder to work on than Mopars?
Always have been. Yeah, they always have been.
Yeah.
It's always been cheaper to build a Chevy.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't lean towards any one. I mean, I do tend to do the Mustangs more just because I know them.
Yeah.
But I like them all, man. Yeah. There's not one car that I could say. I'm not a Mopar guy or a Chevy guy or a Ford guy.
You're an EV guy, right?
I'm a car guy. Not so much on the EVs.
I'm just messing with you. So, okay, here I am, a dad and a son or a mother and a daughter, whatever. And, we want to buy our first car. Car A is some $1,500 Mustang, all rusted out, needs quarters, floors, all that. Car B is a complete car. It's got the motor, the trans, the interior, and it's $10,000. I mean, to the average car guy, it's like, well, this $8,500 difference. It's so much cheaper to start with the one that's missing the motor and the transmission, the interior, and rusted out quarter than to start with the one that costs more. Do you agree with that philosophy?
Not at all.
Not at all.
Always buy the best car you can buy.
Why is that?
Well, because all that stuff costs money to replace. If you can do the work yourself, then yeah, you could probably buy the crappier car.
Yeah.
And work on it and get it done for a fair amount. But if you got to pay somebody to hang quarters, you got to pay somebody to paint it, you got to pay somebody to do all the welding, and if it needs floor pans and all that stuff, you're gonna have $100,000 in that car before you're all done.
Tracking down all those parts too.
Well, yeah, I mean that's the other thing too.
Yeah. People don't realize like the littlest pieces give you the most headaches and cost the most. I mean, and I'm sure you've been here before too. Is I've built a car and I bought another car for a parts car, paid thousands and thousands of dollars because I didn't know what I was going to need, rob hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars of parts off the car, and then sell the car, the parts car.
Yeah.
You know, just because especially in those times, the OEM parts were better, and then at least I could look at a car and see how the dash was or the doors went together versus the other one I had was a basket case.
Yeah.
You know, and it always blew people's mind when you're like, why'd you buy another one? It was like, because it's cheaper, faster, easier.
As far as project cars, I mean, it's really hard to get into a car from the 60s or 70s now just because of the cost.
Yeah.
You know, they cost so much money to buy, and you're buying junk that, I mean, 20 years ago, that car would have been $200, and now it's 15 grand for junk.
Yeah.
You know, and then you still got to put another 50 grand into it before you're all done. So, I mean, if you look at cars from now, like the 80s and 90s, like you get into a Fox body Mustang, I mean, they're still fairly affordable.
Yeah.
If they don't have a big engine and stuff in them, you know, you can still get and there's a lot of parts available for those, you know.
And those are probably not bad investments. Like as
they're
time
not.
goes
They're
on.
not. I mean, even something like a Monte Carlo or a Cutlass or, you know, some of those later model cars, they didn't have too much going on. You could still put a pretty good engine in them, you know, and get away from the computerized stuff unless you want an EFI, you know, that type of thing.
So when restoring a car, like, you know, there's a lot of people like, oh, I can buy a motor or be it a crate motor. I know a guy that can build a motor or I can do that or the transmission. It seems like, I mean, interior is always that weird place, but I mean, you can buy a lot of OEM style interior, but it always seems like paint and body is the hang up on a lot of like restorations.
It's a huge expense. Huge expense.
Why is it so much money?
I think that's why we're seeing rat rods.
Yes.
Okay, because they don't have to spend that kind. If it's rusty and crusty, it kind of has a cool look to it.
Yeah.
Not my style, but people like it. You know, they dig it. It's kind of cool. It's because everything is so expensive now, you know, and labor to do, you know, to put a floor pan in, you know, or to hang a quarter panel, the labor on that's going to be crazy, you know.
I mean, if I want to restore, let's say a Mustang, I buy a basket case and I want to do it nice. I'm not doing a custom. I mean, what does it take? Like 40, 100 hours to restore a car, to paint it, rebuild the motor?
Yeah,
is it more than that?
Depends on the car and how rough it is.
Yeah. To do the whole thing, how many man hours would you say? Okay, your Mustang. How many man hours? What do you got? 40 hours in it? Knock it out in a week?
Well,
I watch TV shows where they do it in an hour.
Well, I'm to tell you the truth, I'm not keeping track of the hours on this car.
Why is that?
Because it's not my car. It's my son-in-law's car, and I'm just doing it. Now, the last Mustang I did, the fastback that I did keep track of the hours. I had over 1,000 hours in that car.
That's the number that we use, is that if you're not doing a crazy cut, and it blows people's mind. If you're not doing a crazy custom, you want a nice restoration. And it depends on how big the car is. Is it a Mustang or is it, you know, a 66 Lincoln Continental?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you could build maybe 2 Mustangs in the amount of time it takes to do that Continental because they're just massive and the parts are harder to get. But we always told people that 1,000 hours up.
Yeah. I had over 1,000 hours in that car. The Coronet I did a couple of years ago, 67 Coronet, I probably had 700 or 800 hours in that, and that was a clean car. There was one rod hole in the quarter panel, period. Everything else was beautiful on that car, and I had over 700 hours in that car.
So, I mean, for the people out there, I mean, if you take 1,000 hours, I mean, your plumber wants $100 an hour. Your electrician wants $150 an hour. So if you have 1,000 hours and you're $100 an hour, that's $100,000 right there, not counting material or anything.
I would say most restoration shops are anywhere between $85 and $150 an hour.
Not counting material and
not
parts.
Not counting material,
and all that.
Parts, and everything else. So it's not hard to do the math on that.
And it's sometimes safe to say, too, where if you've got $100,000 into, let's say, a restoration job or whatever, 50 of it was parts and material, and there's no exact formula, but then 50 was labor. So if you spend $100,000 in labor, it's not hard to spend $100,000 in parts, but obviously it comes down to what kind of car that we're doing.
Well, yeah. What do you want to? Do you want a $30,000 engine in it. You know, I mean, that's not hard to do anymore, you know.
So one of the questions, you know, you said the product was super expensive.
Yep.
Is, you know, if I was to go out, Joe Schmo, and walk into like a painter supply and I wanted to buy, you know, the primers and the sandpapers and the tape and all that stuff today. And I didn't want junk, but I didn't need like the fancy stuff that maybe like Chip Foose uses or whatever. How many hundreds or thousands of dollars would that cost me?
I think for a good restoration for good material, you're probably going to spend 10 grand.
Wow. That much.
Yeah. With all the material. I mean, I've seen gallons of paint that cost $10,000. Color. I'm talking just the color. That's not primer. That's not clear. That's not tape, sandpaper. Just the colors. $10,000.
I looked up the going rate for a gallon of DBC 9700 the other day.
Yeah,
and I about fainted.
It's almost $1,000.
Yeah, I think it was like 880 or 900.
Yeah,
and I mean
the list price. That's way up there.
Yeah, and I was like, wasn't that like $120?
Black
10,
used
50?
to be black still is the least expensive color you can buy. Black and white are the two least expensive.
Why is black or white cheaper than, let's say, like a red?
It's the pigment.
The pigment? What is
that?
that?
A lot of it has to do with the pigment. Well, the pigment in black's like a burnt ash.
Okay.
It's inexpensive to produce, where if you get into a red, they're iron oxides, and they have to be mined and refined. Like
they physically have to go in like ground and get that stuff. So
yeah, okay, same with like pearls and things like that. A lot of that stuff's expensive. Or if it's one of the glamour colors, we'll call them, you know, with the fancy pearls and that, they have to be produced too, but it's expensive to produce them.
So what is a pearl? Because you hear pearls, and I always think of like, oh, my mother's pearls and that, and then I hear Xerelic pearl too.
Well, that's a lab manufactured pearl, the Xerelic. It's
Okay.
got, if you look at a pearl, like say a pearl white car, right? They always have this kind of dirty yellow look to them. You know, just
not
like
Cadillac,
a standard pearl.
Yeah, not Diamond Ice Cadillac. No, I was kidding.
Well,
That's
I mean,
the dirtiest color.
I don't know, that old 800J white diamond or whatever the hell it was called. I hate that color.
I hate that color.
It's just, it's bleh. It just looks like blah. You know, people love it, but if you look at the newer pearls, they have Xerelics in them, and Xerelics, they take that dirtiness out of them, and they have a little bit more sparkle.
They almost look like
but they're expensive.
They almost look like a metallic too.
Yeah,
like
they do.
They have that aluminum gem, like it. You know, it's like smaller. But the first time that I seen a Xerelic, and if you don't know what we're talking about, if you look at most black Mopars now, they're not straight black.
No, they have a metallic.
They got that nice Xerelic in them, and they're beautiful. You know, and I mean, and I'm a sucker for a black car. But I have to admit, I like that little sparkle. It's a little bit different, especially when they're clean and stuff.
Yeah.
So red obviously costs more than black because of the manufacturing stuff, and that makes sense. But you know, if I wanted to buy some clear coat, like the average guy out there on the street, they base clear coat on what does it cost, how does it spray, and maybe how does it rub. And if it's cheap and it sprays good, then it's great clear. Like that's what the average, you know, non-car guy thinks. But there are a lot of clears that are, let's say, $200 for a kit.
Yep.
And then other clears that are $1,000 for a kit.
Yep.
And yeah, you pay for the name sometimes, but is it more than that? Is there a difference between, let's say, a $200 clear and a $1,000 clear?
Sometimes.
Okay.
Sometimes there is. Usually, a better clear is going to be a higher solid. That means that more of that material is going to stay on the car after everything dries out of it. Some of the cheaper clears are real thin. They don't have the UV protection that a higher end clear would have. So,
what is it? What do you mean by that? The UV protection?
Well, they put an additive in there that helps it last when it's in the sunlight.
Okay.
You know what I mean? It if you don't have that, like let's say you just take and put base coat on a car and don't put any clear over the top of it. There's nothing to protect it from the UV rays, from the sunlight.
Okay.
And eventually it's going to burn out and chalk up. Just like when people used to prime their cars and drive them in primer. You know, like DP90. They used to put DP90 on a car. It looked really good when you sprayed it. It had that nice kind of semi-gloss black look to it, but after a few months, it would start to kind of chalk out and turn gray. It's because there's no UV protection there, you know?
Yeah.
Well, the same thing can happen with clear. If there's no UV screener in the clear, it's not going to last that long. You know, they make a lot of that stuff for just lease turn-ins and used car lots and things like that.
So how does Joe Smo, like, you know, like a first timer, how do I buy a good clear? I mean, how do I know, like, you know, like this clear is $200 or this clear is $400 or this clear is $600? How do I navigate that?
Well, you almost have to do a little bit of research. And there's most of the paint companies out there, and I know what clears are good for PPG because I know the line.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of paint companies out there that have what they call a value line, okay? Some of them are better. Some of them are not so good.
Yeah.
You know, there's some clears in their value lines that probably do have full UV screeners in them. You got to research and know which ones they are.
Yeah.
And then they are going to cost more. They aren't going to be like a $200 kit. They're probably going to be like a $400 kit, but they won't be a $1,000 kit.
It's funny because, like, I catch people saying a lot of times, like, well, I use PPG or I use this company or that company. I'm like, what does that mean? That company sells 50 different clears from low end to middle of the road to high end. And then there's even a lot of debate where, you know, what is, like, you know, the best clear that PPG makes or whatever. There could be some debate between 2 or 3 different painters and stuff.
There could be.
In your opinion, what's 1 or 2 of the best clears that PPG makes?
I think for automotive, custom work,
custom hot rod restoration.
You got a pretty good selection there. My favorite is 8152. They just relabeled that as 50/50.
50/50.
DC 50/50.
Yeah, that's the clear we use.
It's the same, you know, product as 8152, and to me that's the best clear. Probably the one next from that is DCU 2021.
Yeah, that's the old
and that's
school
been a standard.
one.
It's been around. It's been around since about 1996.
Yeah,
seriously.
Yeah,
but it's a good clear.
Yeah.
You know, it's very usable. It sands and buffs easy. You know, if you put those two next to each other, I think the 50/50's got a little better clarity to it.
Yeah.
As far as when you're done, it has more of a crisp look to it.
Yeah.
You know, and then they've got for the low VOC markets, they have the Vibrance clear is a real nice clear too.
What about like not a junk clear, but a good budget clear is? I know that they sell like shop line and they have the Euro JC 6800.
That's a good clear.
So like
6800 and 6700 are both good clears, and they have the UV in them.
Yeah. The cool
68 is a faster one, and 67 is a slower one.
The good thing about that clear, well, the bad thing about that clear is, one, it's Euro clear. And what I mean by that is when I buy it, it's in 5 liters and then 2.5 liters. And being American, I don't know what a liter is. So
then buy the Omni version, and it comes in a gallon.
Yeah. But we just bought
161 Omni and 6700 shop line are pretty much the same thing.
We just bought a kit of the JC 6800, and we bought the slow reducer, obviously, or catalyst, sorry, and it's a 2-to-1 mix, but it gives you 7.5 liters sprayable.
Yeah,
and we did the math. We paid $300 for a kit, tax, title, plate out the door, and we did the math on it, and it was about 80 cents a sprayable ounce. It doesn't get any cheaper than that.
That's a good clear too.
Yeah,
it really is.
So when people talk about like cheap clear and stuff, I'm like, if you can't afford, you know, $1 a sprayable ounce, then you need to rattle can that thing. Like, and I've rattle canned some stuff, but I mean, if you can't afford the $1 an ounce stuff, maybe we should be shooting that thing.
I think if I'm going to save money somewhere though, I'm going to take a look at the color, because you can save a lot of money going to a budget color system, as long as it's something that isn't watered down with a bunch of filler. Because if you look at some of the value colors, they put a lot of clear in them, you know, like clear binder, which makes them, they don't cover well, you know, and you end up having to put 5, 6, 8 coats to get the color you're looking for. If you can buy, well, I'll say shop line, if you buy shop line plus, that's a really good color system, and you can probably cut your color cost in half.
Yeah.
compared to, say, buying DBC.
Yeah.
And you got a good system there. And if you put a good quality clear over the top of it, you're good to go.
I mean, that makes sense to me. If you wanted to save money, you could still get the color that you want, the look that you want, probably for half the price, a third of the price.
Yeah.
But then don't cheap out and put that bottom of the barrel clear on it. I'm not saying you necessarily have to do the $1,000 kit stuff.
Yeah.
But don't buy the $100 kit that someone sold you out of the trunk of your car, or you bought it on Amazon.
You don't know what you're getting there.
Yeah, and I mean, and
you put all this time and expenditure into doing a car, and then you're going to go cheap on the paint, and you've spent a year or 2 years or 3 years making this car right.
And then it fails in a year or two.
And it fails in a year or two.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've seen
like,
it.
Well, I
more
don't drive
than
the
me.
car every day. No, but when do you drive it? You drive it on sunny days.
Yeah.
That's when you need all the UV protection. Buy the good clear. Buy the better clear.
Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. Spend the money on the clear. You can skimp a little bit on the base. Where's another place that you should spend the money on? Maybe the bare metal primer? Is that another place to spend the money on?
Well, I mean, yeah, bare metal is pretty critical. You've got prep is all of it. If you don't have a good surface to put your product on, it's not going to last. But you can go into some of the other stuff, like if you stay out of the Deltron line and go into, say, maybe the Fleet lines, there's some fantastic products in the Fleet lines that are probably cost comparative to, say, like an Omni or a Shop line or some of the lower end stuff.
Yeah.
Because they keep it lower for the fleet shops, right?
That Del Fleet is
and they
nice.
have some amazing epoxies in that line that I mean, that's what I use. I use Del Fleet on bare metal.
I think what's confusing for a lot of people is that they don't realize that, like, primer is this just general category, and there's so many different types of primers, and they're used for different things. I mean, we have bare metal primers, and then we have like a high fill primer or primer surfacer, or some people call it Body Man in a can or God in a can, or whatever. But if we're talking bare metal primers, is it true that it's pretty much etch versus epoxy in most cases?
Well, etch you're going to use more in production shops.
Okay.
Because you sand something down, you bust through the bare metal. You can't put, say, urethane, or most urethane surfacers aren't designed to go to bare metal because everything's galvanized. So it's always trying to push whatever it is off. You need something to bite into that steel, and that's either going to be an etch primer or an epoxy.
Okay.
You're going to use an etch primer more in production work because you're going to probably go over it with either a surfacer or a sealer and then go right to color.
So if I'm doing restoration,
for restoration,
probably epoxy.
Stay away from etch.
Okay.
Go to epoxy.
And I know that they do sell high build epoxy, and PBG does.
Right.
They're not the only one, but the epoxy you're talking about is the thin. Just put 1 or 2 coats on for the bare metal.
I use a thin build.
Okay.
Del Fleet epoxy. I use F4921.
Okay.
That's the thin one I like to use, and I'll put 2 coats of that over my bare steel after I prep it properly.
Yeah.
That's a whole other thing. And then I can do any of my body work over the top of that.
I know people don't like to call it Bondo, but in the industry, we call it Bondo, mud, putty, dough, filler. I mean, and maybe you shouldn't tell your customers that, but when we're talking...
Bondo's a brand name.
Yeah. But I mean, it's unfortunately a term that we still use this day. Are you telling me that you're putting your Bondo, your filler, your mud over that dry cured epoxy and not on direct steel?
Yes.
Because a lot of people were taught, and I'm sure this was true in your day,
sure,
that Bondo ain't gonna stick to paint, and it's got to be on bare metal, and everybody knows
no, the
that.
old style lacquers and enamels. No, you couldn't do that because the stuff was always constantly moving around. It never cured. But today, that's a whole nother story. And the reason I put filler or polyester, like polyester primer is very popular. It's basically sprayable filler, right? You mix it with a catalyst, but what happens to body filler and epoxy primer as it cures? What do you notice about it?
Shrinks.
Well, no. As it's curing, what does it do?
Yeah, moves around.
It gets hot.
Oh yeah.
You ever notice it builds up heat?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it
Big
builds
time.
up heat. So if you take something that's cold and move it to a hot area, what happens? You get condensation.
Yeah.
Right. So have you ever taken a car that was restored, say, a long time ago, like maybe back in the 70s or 80s, and you notice it's blistering and bubbling, and you grind into it, and you got body filler there, right? And you grind that body filler off. What's underneath that body filler?
Nothing but rust.
There's rust, right?
Yeah.
Why did that happen? Well, maybe they didn't prep it right. But you think that body man put body filler over the top of rusty metal? I don't think so.
Yeah.
So what happens is that when you put filler or you put polyester on bare steel, if that chemical reaction takes place and you get that heat, you're taking the chance that you could have condensation in between that. So by putting epoxy down, epoxy's got major adhesion. Okay, plus it creates a barrier between the bare metal and the filler or the polyester that stops that condensation from happening, and it gives you a rust or corrosion protection.
Is this epoxy good for steel and aluminum?
Yes.
Okay. So not only is it going to protect from corrosion, it actually is going to promote adhesion. So
absolutely.
It chemically sticks to it. So
yes.
I don't have to worry about my mechanical scratch. I mean, I do, but I have that chemical adhesion. But then it also offers this barrier so I don't get rust from the Bondo or anything like that,
right.
too.
And I'll usually put 2 coats, maybe 3. It depends. You need to give it a couple days, and then I will scratch the epoxy too before I put filler on there.
It's funny because if we're going to build a house, there's an order of operations. And maybe people don't follow them exactly, but it's okay. I got to get permits. I'm going to have an architect do this. We prep the site, then we do the foundation, and then we do the wall. You don't put the drywall up, and then you have the plumbers and electricians come in or the insulators. I mean, and people laugh like
there's steps.
Yeah, there's steps.
There's steps.
You think that there's and obviously you think that there's steps in building a car or like an order of operation that people should follow?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Get back to basics, man. That's what it's all about.
So what are some of the major categories or major steps? So I mean, obviously you acquire the car, you come up with the budget, you have your vision. Most people can handle that part.
Yeah.
Maybe not the realistic budget. Like we always say, like if you buy a car and you think, oh, I can build this car for $40,000 and I can do it
times
in a year.
It by 3.
Yeah, and if you're not cool with that number,
yeah, times it by 3.
Yeah,
it's always way more than you think. Always.
So like when you come up with that number of time and money, if you're not good with that 2 or 3, you better walk.
Absolutely, or buy something done.
So the first step obviously would probably be wash it, document it, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Like after I get the plan, what advice do you have for the disassembling the car? What do people do wrong? What are things that you've learned in your long career about
chuck everything in a box or coffee can? You can't stress how important it is as you're taking something apart to take that extra time and either bag it or put it in a container and mark it exactly what it is. You don't think it's significant when you're doing it, but it could be 2-3 years before you ever reassemble that car. There's no way in hell you're going to remember where all that stuff goes. I mean, how many Mustangs I've done? I still bag and tag stuff when I take it apart because I don't remember everything. Yeah. The only thing, what helps is having another car there that is already assembled that you can go back and look at, but not all cars are the same. If you're doing a resto mod or something like that, you change a lot of stuff.
We live in an age too now where especially like doors get people, like how complex doors are.
Oh yeah.
Is why not take some pictures or shoot some video of it?
Shoot as many pictures as you can, and as you're taking it apart, label everything. Even if you're never going to use that part again. I can't tell you how many times I've went to change something, but I've gone back to look at the old parts I had, and then I can remember how that goes, and it helps you on the reassembly.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
And the bagging and tagging it, I like what you said is like we also will break them down in different categories where I'll have, like, let's say Ziploc bags that I put in, and I label right, left door, whatever, pictures. And then, I mean, those thumb drives are so inexpensive now, as you can dump them all there, throw them in the box. But we'll even go where this box is all, you know, interior parts. This box is all door parts. This box is all under hood parts, because it gets confusing. And people don't realize this is, you know, you started building it in your dad's garage when you were 18 years old. You might take it to a buddy's house or sell this house or get a divorce or take it to the shop. And that car may move a couple locations before it ever gets finished. You know?
Absolutely.
So, I mean, the bag
and stuff always gets lost.
And I think it gives you a chance to become intimate with the vehicle too, where you can make a list of, okay, this stuff is broke. I can have time to look into replacing this part of these gaskets, and you make a list. And I think that we said it earlier is, you know, how you do anything is how you do everything. And I think people who just rip through and tear down a car all in one day, disassemble it all in one day and just throw all the piles in the corner or whatever, those cars ain't making it back together.
Those are the ones you usually buy for cheap.
Yeah.
You know, that's the project car for your son, because somebody took it apart, got too deep into it, and then they end up selling it for maybe a third of what they have into it. Those are good cars to buy if you know how to put it back together, you know.
The thing is the bagging and tagging, and I don't think we can stress this enough, is that doesn't really cost money. And especially if you're doing it yourself.
It's all time.
Yeah. And I think if you do it correctly, the extra 10 hours you spend will save you 100 hours and thousands of dollars.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, I don't think you can, you know, spend too long or OCD out enough on the disassembly. And for the rookies out there, they can handle that. Anybody can handle that.
Yeah.
Is taking apart, taking pictures, and documenting and recording it. I'm big on that, and you know, and I know you are too. That's why I wanted to bring it up.
The other point I'd bring up too is, as you're taking that car apart, you're probably gonna, you know, if you're gonna make changes and do a resto mod, then you're probably gonna have a lot of parts that you aren't gonna need anymore. Don't be in a hurry to sell that stuff.
Amen.
Because that's some of the biggest mistakes you'll make. Because if nothing else, you've got that part to see how it originally went. Because anytime you change something on a car, 10 things around it are going to change too. So you've got to know how that went together originally, because, you know, even though it says bolt on, or, you know, bullshit.
Yeah. That, I mean, even collision guys, like bodymen who are good, who know this, they got a wrecked fender that's dented, the new fender's there. They don't get rid of anything until the car goes down the road, because you never know, that one clip or that bracket didn't come with it. And the thing is like when you're restoring a car, you're like, oh, I'm going to throw the seats out because I'm not going to need those, or I'm going to sell them. I'm going to buy these Recaros, and I heard Recaros are the best. And then you start looking them up, and they're 10 grand.
Yep.
And then you're over budget at everyone else, and you go, oh, I'm just going to use my factory seats. Well, they're gone. They're sold them or whatever.
Yep.
And you never know until it goes down. So I love that. Bag and tag, keep everything. I mean, you can throw a lot of stuff in your attic if you put it in boxes or whatever, tuck it up there, organize it, nerd out. You know, that's a good father-son project. Yep. So I got the car disassembled. And let's say I want to, and we can leave the interior and the chrome and the glass. I mean, because, like you're building a house, you got the masons, you got the plumbers, you got the electricians, the roofers. Like in our industry, you know, you got the body techs, the painters, the mechanics, the electrician, the interior guy, even the sublets, the chrome, you know, on and on and on. And maybe your mechanic who does your motor is not the guy doing your brakes or transmission or rear end.
Right.
I mean, it's complicated. But so I got the car in my garage. I've got it disassembled. I want to take the parts off, and I want to strip them to bare metal. What's the 2 or 3 different options to do that? I mean, should I just get a sander, or should I blast it?
Well, you can sand it by hand. That's a lot of labor, and it's really hard to do some of that stuff. I prefer blasting.
Okay.
You know, either media blast or sand blast. Depends on the part. You know, if it's sheet metal or body part, I have it media blasted. If it's frame, suspension, anything that's heavy, sandblast it.
Yeah. I think it turns a lot.
Paint strippers are they've kind of gone by the wayside a little bit. I mean, there's still dippers out there. You know, you could have something dipped.
So they've taken the car and they're actually just dipping it, and it's eating all the paint and the rust and Bondo off.
Yeah, the only thing I don't like about that is it takes out all the
caulk,
sealant, you know, especially like a hood, and then it flaps around. It's really hard to replace that without.
Hopefully they get all the acid out and it doesn't start rusting.
That's the other thing. I really prefer blasting over dip. I mean, some people like the dip.
So the three most common ways are, you know, obviously media blast or sandblast. We'll put those in the same category. Is chem strip it, which you can have a sublet do it, or you can do it yourself, and then mechanically strip it. Just get your DAs and grinders out or whatever and start sanding it.
Yeah, that's not bad if the car doesn't have a ton of paint on it, but you know, the car's got a lot of paint on it. Time you buy all the sandpaper and have surgery for carpal tunnel by the time you're done, you might as well have it. Well, it's blasted.
It's funny is like, let's say I had a car and I just get the phone book. There's no such thing as phone books anymore, but I look up
on the internet.
Yeah, I Google it. I get the phone book out and I call some sandblasters and I say I got a 67 Mustang fastback, and what are you going to quote me to blast it? They tell me like $5,000. A lot of people are just.
It's usually not that much.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, to do the entire car.
It's usually about $1,500 to $1,800.
Okay. Well, a lot of people I think are turned off at that big figure, but you know, by the time, like you said, you buy all the sandpaper and then you still got to do it. You could have that much, you know, in it just with the material.
Sandpaper's $50 to $70 a box if you buy stuff that doesn't fall apart in 10 seconds, you know.
And tedious work.
It's horribly tedious.
But the cool thing is that, you know, if you did want to blast the entire car, the average, you know, restoration guy, like if it's just his son and him doing it, they can't handle that whole car. So, I mean, I think it'd be better to take the fenders and get them blasted, and then you could get them in primer.
Do it in pieces. Yeah, that's exactly how I did this Mustang. I did all the exterior sheet metal first, and then I took them the body. And
keeps the price down a little bit. I mean, maybe not in the big picture. It might make it more expensive, but, you know, a couple hundred here, a couple hundred there.
Then you always get the surprise, you know, when you get it back. Oh, shit, where'd that hole come from?
So I
wasn't there.
I get the car blasted. And, you know, maybe I got to bump some dents or weld up some holes or make some patches. And then I do the epoxy, and then I do the Bondo bodywork on top of it.
Normally what I'll do is if I get the car back, you want to immediately get primer on it. And actually, if they can prime it at the blaster, because some blasters offer that, where they'll put epoxy primer on it before they bring it to you. You want to get primer on it as soon as you can. I mean, in 50% humidity, rust will start forming in 30 minutes.
Wow.
And I'm not kidding you. So you gotta really watch that. So I will put epoxy primer on the vehicle. I mean, everybody wants to see that car in bare metal in the shop. Ooh, that looks cool. You know what? Get epoxy on it. Get epoxy on it as soon as you possibly can. And sometimes what I'll do is if I've got areas that I know I have to do repairs on, I'll put tape over those areas. So because it's sometimes hard to remember where all that stuff is, you know. So I'll put tape over the areas that I know I'm going to need to fix, and then I'll just epoxy all the rest of it. So at least that whole area has epoxy on it.
I've caught so much hell from doing that. I'm glad I'm not the only one that does that.
What's that? Put tape over the bad areas?
A couple little pinholes and stuff, you know, because you're right, it might fill it in.
Yeah, you're gonna weld on that and grind it and and metal prep it.
Yeah, but
anyway,
it's like I wanted to make primer this weekend. I'm getting it back from the blaster. I know I've did all my body work, and then it comes back and oh shit, there's another pinhole or another this or another that.
There's always something.
And it's like, no,
and you can see that. You can see it a lot better when it's all bare than when you start putting primer on it, because you tend to cover a lot of that stuff up.
Another trick, and it's just triggering me with what you're saying with the pinholes, is that like if I shave a door handle or an emblem, I'll usually I MIG it, but some guys TIG it. They weld it solid, and I'll grind it, and I'll look at it, and I'm chasing every pinhole 100%. and then I'll clean it up, wire wheel it, blast it or whatever. And sometimes like you'll catch a pinhole or whatever. I'm staring at it with my eyes, and I'm like,
or put a light behind it.
That's what I do.
Yeah,
I'll shut the lights off of the shop, and it's funny. It's like you're looking at it and you go, man, this is perfect, and then you put that light behind it and shut the lights off in the shop, and like, oh my God, there's 3 pinholes.
Where'd that come from?
And I mean, the water would just get in behind there.
Well, and that's a year from now, you're going to get a blister, and you go, where the hell did that come from? You know, that's where that comes from.
We even go as far too as that, like on the back side. I mean, you can primer it or whatever or undercoat it, but I'll take like filler 8115 and cover it on the back side. Yeah,
either filler or some kind of seam sealer.
Yeah, something. Yeah, so at least if there was a pinhole, it's on both sides. Because water. Water's so deadly, and I always tell people, like, you ever been to the Grand Canyon? Like, you look at the Grand Canyon and realize that water created that. What do you think a little bit of water is going to do to your car? Like, that pinhole doesn't seem like much, but it just pushes all the mud out. And everyone blames the Bondo. Yeah. And it's not.
Nope. It's what's underneath it.
So once I have it back and I rough the body work and stuff like that, is it important to put those parts back on the cars to like line up gaps and stuff like that?
Yeah, usually when I bodywork a car, it's completely assembled.
Okay. Why is that?
Because you want everything to be even.
Okay.
If you want if you want the car to look more like it did from the factory, then do what you're going to do. Yeah. They never lined up perfect, and if you're going, but to me, if I'm going to take the time to make a car right like that, I want all the panels to line up. I want the gaps to be right. And that takes, even on a stock restoration, it's a lot of work to make that stuff look right. You're edge grinding and re-welding gaps and things like that. You want that car all together. When I build the doors, when I bolt the doors on the car, what I'll do is I will weigh all the components that were originally in that car, the windows, the mechanisms, all the locks, everything, anything that was bolted to that door. I'll put it in a box, and I'll put it on a scale, and I'll weigh it.
Wow.
Because that's going to change the alignment of that panel when you bolt it all together. So then what I'll do is I'll fill bags full of sand until I get that exact weight, and I'll put them in the door. That way I know that door has the weight on it that it's going to have on it when it's all bolted together.
Awesome.
Because that makes a big difference, on all that
stuff. That's nerd OCD stuff,
it's
right?
Terrible.
So are you talking you get within the pound or the ounce? Like how
I get pretty damn close.
I knew you did.
I get pretty damn close.
I knew you did. You're like, no, it needs another ounce.
The only thing I'll tell you is if you got to do any welding on that door, make sure you take that shit out, because I learned the hard way.
Had a little small fire.
Yeah, well, not a fire, but the sand went all over the deal.
Okay.
Yeah, it was terrible.
Yeah. So, I get that the epoxy primer is the bare metal, and unfortunately people call it sealer a lot on the time, which, you being a painter, sealer is something different than you.
Yeah.
But in internet speak, a lot of people call it, I'm sealing up the bare metal. It's sealer, which we'll just leave it at that.
Well, you're putting epoxy on it. Yeah, and technically you are sealing it up. Yeah.
But a painter wouldn't call it sealer.
No.
That gets confusing to some people.
No, they call it primer.
Yeah. So now that I got, and then every time that I sand it and I get some bare metal, it's probably best to kick some more of that same epoxy over top of the bare metal.
You mean if you're sanding your filler?
Yeah, like over time.
I mean, sometimes I do. If I got to put more filler down, usually I'll just put. If it's that small of a spot, I mean, if it's that's really OCD, man.
Yeah.
If you put epoxy down, now you got to wait a day,
a week.
Well, a day, at least a day to put something back over the top of it. So usually I'll just. And I'm careful.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'll put 2 or 3 coats, and usually my epoxy is black.
Yeah.
So then when I'm sanding my filler, obviously you're going to start to see a dark area when you're getting close to the end. You know what that means? Stop sanding.
Over-sanding syndrome?
Well, if you over-sand, you're going to bust through the bare metal. You're going to bust through no matter what. Here and there, you are going to bust through. But to blatantly know that you're about to bust through and you just keep sanding, well, dumb idea, you know. Just stop sanding, and if you got to put more filler down, put more filler down.
I think all like high-end painters or body techs are definitely crazy, and the funny thing is I love the OCD part about it. It's not that we're smarter or better or whatever than the guy next to us, but we're willing to go to the end of the edge of the earth to make it perfect or make it our way. And it's just about time and patience. I mean, I've literally walked in a shop one day, worked all day on a car, left, and was farther behind on the car than when I walked in at like 8 a.m. or whatever.
That happens.
And it I'll tell you what, it'll defeat you. But
yeah,
when you were talking about the OCD thing about like, because I'm a big epoxy guy, you know that.
Yeah.
And what I'll do is I'll put the epoxy down and then I'll let it sit for days before we put anything else on. And it's funny because when I did the last class with you and Charlie Hutton, is I said something to Charlie. I said, so at the end of the day, and you've been blocking that in the car all day, are you telling me that you walk around that car and you throw epoxy on every bare metal? And he goes, you're damn right that I do. And I said, every day? He goes, yeah. And then that way it's dry.
Well, and if it's the end of the day, then yeah, maybe I will do that. If there's areas that are bare, then I will do that.
And I said, I love that. I said, so if you're leaving at 5 o'clock, and he's like, it's not that hard. If you're leaving at 5 o'clock, you know you're leaving at 5. You mix up the epoxy, and then let's say at 4:30, you just blow it off, and you're just hitting 5 or 6 little areas, and what's the big deal? And I'm like, all right, he's crazy too. I like that about him. So, all right, so the epoxy primer, I got that, but then, you know, what do I put over top of it? This high fill, I mean, there's urethanes, there's polyesters. Once upon a time, there was enamels and lacquers. And
so over all your body work.
Yeah.
Right? Once all the body work's done, you don't want to prime until all your body work's done.
Okay.
Primer is not filler, right? If you're having to prime, I mean, yeah, there's always times you might have to prime something a second time, but if you have to usually do more than one major coat of primer, then your body work has not been done properly. Okay. So for a primer surfacer, so we go from primer that goes on the bare metal, and then primer surfacer is what we're going to use to correct all the maybe sand scratches, imperfections, things like that, small imperfections. You got a couple ways to go. I avoid urethanes for that because urethanes are more for production work and they tend to shrink more. Okay. Especially if you build them, if you're expecting a lot of build out of them.
Yeah.
So the best way to go is either with a polyester, which is not a bad way, or a high build epoxy. Okay. And I tend to go towards a high build epoxy because if there are any little bare metal spots, then I just use the high build epoxy. I'm killing two birds with one stone. Yeah. I got my high build, which the high build epoxies that are out there build just about as good as a polyester. Only problem with them is they are a little tougher to sand than a polyester. Sand a little bit easier.
Yeah.
You know,
like butter.
Yeah. Well, and I used high build epoxy when I just did this Mustang, and it was a little bit of work sanding it. But you know what? It's straight. It looks good, and I'm really happy with the way it came out.
There's a lot of guys out there that, let's say you use especially a polyester.
Yeah.
Because they've been around. It seems like they're more popular or whatever. They're not necessarily better, but they're more popular. A lot of guys will say that if you come in and you do that primer surfacer step with a poly, that you have to put a urethane primer over top of that and block that.
You can't put color directly over the top of that because it's basically body filler, Bondo, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Okay. You wouldn't put color over the top of raw body filler, would you? No.
Me?
Of course not.
Oh, every day? No, just kidding.
Yes.
No, just kidding.
Some people might.
Just got to put a couple more coats on.
So you got to put something down.
Okay.
So what I do there, and I do the same thing I did the same thing on top of my high build epoxy, mainly for color reasons. You know, I use a sealer.
Okay.
A primer sealer. And because the difference between a sealer and a surfacer and a urethane is that the sealer has a higher resin content, where the surfacers have a higher talc content. Talc makes it a little easier to sand, but that's where a lot of the shrinkage comes from. Whereas if you have something that's got a higher resin content, it tends to hold out better. It doesn't shrink as much. The color doesn't suck into it as much.
Okay.
So I will put 2 or 3 coats of a sealer down on top of either the polyester or my epoxy, and then I'll let that sit, and then come back and I'll sand it flat with 600, 800, whatever, and then I go right to color.
So it sounds like that sealer stage, that's like built in, like to the top coats, where you're doing that like pretty much the same weekend as you're doing your base and your clear too.
Maybe.
So
maybe you got to give it at least overnight. The longer you give it, time is so important in restorations. That's, you know, if you're trying to do everything in a week,
yeah,
it isn't going to work.
Yeah.
You know, you might get it to work, but later on down the road, it's going to shrink and pucker and do all kinds of weird stuff. The longer you let something sit, you know,
you keep saying shrinking and stuff, like, you know, I've noticed, like, if you, like, let's say you paint a black car and you primer, everyone says you got to primer over 150 grit or higher. Well, I can primer over 80 grit, and then I can primer today, paint today. You can look at it and it looks great. And then you come look at it a week later, a month later, and it doesn't look so good. Like, what are we talking about with this shrinkage? Like, what's going on with that?
Well, everything you use has solvent in it, right? And what happens to the solvent as it dries? It evaporates. It goes away. So the more material you put on something, you're also putting solvent on that panel. That solvent's got to go somewhere. Nothing is fully cured until all the solvent has gone out of it. So if I rush something and I pile a bunch of solvent, like I could prime something right now, right? And in a half an hour, I could probably sand it and it would powder up and I could paint over it. Does that mean it's fully cured? No, there's still solvent in it. If I'm sanding a panel and I can smell solvent, that means there's still solvent in it. Okay. Yeah. It's still there.
Yeah.
So that means that even though I'm got that thing sanded smooth, what's going to happen is in a few days, all that solvent's going to go away and it's going to shrink back down to what it originally was.
Yeah, it's funny because, like, in people, this is free information. If you do, we call it a P sheet, but a technical data sheet, a TDS, is all that stuff's available online for free.
Oh, yeah.
And if you look at the last part of that P sheet, it says in volume and weight, like, what is the shrink rate, the solid content of this product. And so if you look at a product and it says 50%, that basically means that half of it's going to go bye-bye.
Whatever you spray on, half of it's going away.
So a product like base coat, like an average base coat,
20%.
So 80% of it's going to evaporate.
Yeah.
So if I buy a gallon of base coat, the average base coat is 80% of that is solvent, it's VOC.
Well, you're going to add solvent to it too.
It's going to disappear.
But you got to look at what the solid content is ready to spray. There's a difference between ready to spray and in the can, you know.
How about clear coat? What's in the world of averages?
Most automotive clear coats are probably in the 40 to 45% range.
Wow. So it's safe to say that half of that clear coat is going to evaporate.
Mm-hmm.
And is there a difference between, like, I paint something, I primer something, the next day it's dry, I can touch it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's 70, 80 degrees in my garage. I can touch it dry, I can sand it. And I say to my buddy who's a painter, hey, man, this is cured. And he always corrects me. He said, it ain't cured, it's dry. I mean, what's the big difference? What's the difference between dried and cured?
Cured means that it's completely linked up. All the chemicals have linked together, and all the solvent is gone.
So the whole shrinking process is kind of stopped.
Normally when it's cured, yes.
Okay. And how long does that take?
Depends.
Yeah.
It depends. How much did you put on? Okay. If you read the directions, they may say 2 to 3 coats. Okay. That's your normal amount. But if you put 6 coats on, let's say you put 6 coats of primer down instead of 3, you could double or triple that time easily. And then temperature has a lot to do with it too. If it's 70 degrees, that's fine. But all paint stops curing. The cure will stop at below 55. Okay.
Wow.
Or below 60. I try to keep my work area at least 60 degrees because it will stop at, and it will not cure until you get that heat back up again.
So primering a car in a Michigan winter, getting that last coat out of and running out of the pole barn and shutting all the heat off, and it gets 30 degrees in there is probably not the best thing for it.
It could sit in there for a week, and it's still going to be not cured by the time you get back to it and turn the heat on. And then by then, you might have ruined the chemicals in it.
Under normal conditions, under normal use, which I know every product, and I know it's a shit question, I apologize, but is there a good rule of thumb? Like, is it 30 days for things to cure? What's a good rule of thumb to go by?
A lot of it depends on the product.
Yeah.
Take a look at the product sheet. They'll always tell you how many hours or how many days, and they'll always say at 70 degrees, okay, because those are lab conditions.
Okay.
So if you are under 70 degrees, for every 15 degrees below that, it's going to double. And then if you get to 55, it stops completely. But on the other hand, if it's above that, so it's 15 degrees higher, if it says it completely cures in an hour, then it's 85 degrees, cuts it in half. It's a half hour.
Okay.
So call that the 15-degree rule.
Does it help to like, let's say I'm working in the summer on my car and I prime something and, I've got the hood and the fenders and I'm working on the hood. Does it help to throw the fender out there, like in the sun?
In the sun? Well, yeah, it's like a bake oven.
Okay.
Sure. Doesn't hurt it.
Okay. So it'll help probably speed up that curing time a little bit?
Yeah. You want it to flash or get dull before you do that.
Yeah.
If you send it out there right away, what can happen is it can skin over and then it traps a bunch of stuff in there. So you kind of want it to be somewhat dry before you put it outside in the sun.
So I'm going to paint my car. I've got it all sealed, all cleaned, all sanded, tacked, scuffed, all that. And we've been working on this car for a year. And I'm going to actually lay the base coat and clear coat down. What is like the biggest mistakes that people make, like in that process, like the base coat and clear coat? What do the rookies or the amateurs do? Or
well, I see one of the biggest mistakes out there is they don't clean it properly. To me, that's that car sits out, like if you get it all ready to go the night before and you're going to spray it in the morning, you got to clean that thing before you start spraying on it. And by clean it, I mean like wax and grease remover, that type of thing. Because if it sits overnight, anything could have landed on it in the course of 8 hours or 16 hours or whatever amount of time it takes. So you can't clean a car enough. That's the biggest thing I'd stress, because that's where a lot of failure, either paint coming off later is because of contamination, you're getting fish eyes, even dirt is caused by not cleaning the car properly.
If you do your homework, and I'm sure there's plenty of stuff out there on the internet, if you're of average intelligence guy and you do your homework and you're diligent and you dot your I's and cross your T's, can I do a decent paint job in my garage, or do I need a paint booth?
No, you can do a decent paint job in your garage. You got to have good ventilation.
Okay.
Some sort of ventilation.
All right.
You're always going to get some level of trash in the paint.
Yeah.
But you're probably going to sand and polish. So
okay.
Most of that. But the other thing is you got to make sure you got the right equipment too.
Yeah.
You're not going to do it with a 3 horsepower air compressor,
So what kind of air do I need? I mean,
depends on your gun.
Like if I buy an average Iwata, DeVilbiss, or SATA, or I have a buddy that's got one, like what kind of CFM or gallons or horsepower do I need to power something like that?
Well, that gun probably is going to take anywhere between 12 and 15 CFM.
Wow.
Okay. Any like those guns you got there, that SATA right there, I think that's an RP, so that's probably going to take, 12, that's at least 12 on that one, at least. So you got to figure a standard compressor gives you about 3 CFM per horsepower.
Okay, so you need at least a 5.
At least a 5.
Yeah. It's funny because...
But the problem with a 5 is, it depends on the tank, too. How much of a tank do you have?
Yeah.
because you could pull the trigger on that thing, and 5 minutes into it, if you start to hear that air pressure drop, you're losing all that CFM.
So it's probably safe to have something that's 12 to 15 CFM, at least.
At least.
Yeah, I mean, on the low end.
At least.
And it's funny because there's a lot of those 80-gallon, 5 horsepower compressors that you look at, and they're 9.9 CFM.
Yeah.
Which
that's
is
not enough. It's hard to paint one entire whole car at one time. Base coat's not bad. It's when you get to the clear coat, because if you don't have the volume getting to that gun, that's where it goes on rough. You start to see orange peel. You get runs, things like that.
So, for a first-time painter, if I'm basing in a garage, I mean, obviously a booth, changes everything, a professional grade. I keep hearing that waterborne base coat is the best. If I'm painting in my garage, would you say to stick to solvent base coat or waterborne, or you can do whatever you want?
Probably stick to solvent.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not saying you can't spray water in your garage. You can.
Okay.
But it relies a lot on a lot of air movement and that type of thing. It needs a better environment for it to work properly.
You almost need a professional grade booth that's set up for that. Okay.
Yeah. Have I sprayed water in my garage? Absolutely, I have. Have I sprayed a whole car in water in my garage? No.
Yeah.
And I don't typically like to spray entire cars in my garage.
So
I guess one thing you could do, if you're concerned with it, you could get all the base coat on so everything's the same color, and then start pulling panels off and just start maybe clearing 1 or 2 panels at a time. That's one way to do it.
Yeah.
Because that way the volume doesn't drop as bad with 2 panels as it does with 6 or 8 panels. You're trying to go across a hood or something like that.
And even though it's kind of tedious, the cool thing about that is you can clear all the sides and the doors, so you don't have that hard line or whatever. And it does seem kind of crazy, but it's not a bad way to do it.
Yeah, I pull cars apart all the time to clear coat them.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird because, let's say you're doing a racing stripe or something. Yeah. I mean, anybody who's painted a motorcycle knows this. With heavy graphics, is you'll get your bodywork done and you'll seal it and you'll base it and all that. And sometimes I'll clear it, you put 2 coats, if it's a complicated job, but then we'll assemble it, because your flame job or your graphic, you don't want to clear it and then the line be a little bit off.
Right.
Which, and how do we know this? Because it's probably happened to us at one time. And then once you get all your base coat and stuff done, you're like, all right, we're pulling this car back apart and we're going to clear it in pieces. And and then unfortunately, the body man may be helping you and he's got rough hands, or you need another hand from some rookie, and it's in that real fragile stage of base, and it's stressful.
You got to be careful, man. But it's worth it in the end if it comes out.
It is. I always like that trick of pulling apart and clearing them, and it seems like a wasted step. It seems like it's a gamble, but I don't think it's harder.
No.
And I think it's better in a lot of ways.
You just have to be careful. Wear gloves. Wear gloves when you're taking it apart. You don't want your fingerprints getting all over everything. Wear rubber gloves, and
so
have somebody there to help you pull a fender off or pull a door off, or
So the clear coat, do you think that's one of the harder things to spray? With all the primers and base coats and sealers and clears, is that one of the? It seems like a lot of people are.
Well, it's all a technique. It takes a little bit of practice. The biggest thing is just having the right equipment.
Yeah,
that's where I see the biggest mistake being made is you don't have the right equipment. Either the spray gun's not set up right, or you don't, and air volume is huge. That's probably one of the biggest things, is making sure you got enough air.
What's a good paint gun that on a budget? Obviously we don't want to drop $1,000 on a gun, but do I have to spend $400, $500, $600, $700 on a new gun nowadays? Is there anything out there that's on a decent budget?
I've got good guns that I've had for years.
Forever, yeah.
And if you take care of it, it'll last you a long time. But yeah, probably $400 or $500, you could probably find yourself a pretty good gun.
How long will something like that last?
Depends on how well you take care of it. Make sure you clean it when it's done. I mean, you got to think, the spray gun, you got a needle going into a fluid tip, right? And you got constant metal on metal contact there. Eventually, those parts wear out. If you're somebody that's going to paint something once a month, it probably lasts you a hell of a long time. If you're the painter that's painting every single day, well, you're going to buy a good gun, and
I got Jet 90s from the 1990s that can still spray today.
It's a good gun, man. Yeah. It really was. I don't know if you can still buy parts for it.
Well, maybe overseas. I don't know if I can get parts for it, but maybe overseas.
Yeah, I still got some JGAs,
I had. That was my first gun.
Yeah.
The DeVilbiss JGA.
Yeah.
So this as an industry, like for, a young person, be it a guy or a girl out there who wants to get into paint and body, I mean, do you think that this is a good field to get into? Was it good to you? Did you like it?
Yeah, I mean, you got to protect yourself. That's the biggest thing. Wear the right stuff. Wear masks, gloves, glasses. Absolutely a good respirator, whether it's fresh air or cartridge or whatever. You gotta protect yourself.
Yeah.
Back when I got into it, seemed like you could make a lot more money. But I think the industry is changing, and they need more people to do. They don't have enough people in this industry. I think the average age now is 50.
Yeah. That's not old.
That's not old. What does that tell you, though? Yeah. How many 20-year-olds are getting into this stuff, or 18-year-olds?
We had so one of my younger students, and he wasn't bragging, and I'm not going to say his name. I was in Europe in December, and he didn't graduate from high school. He's a hustler, smart kid, hardworking kid. We were always talking about like how he's doing with money, and like he's married now, got a kid. I mean, he came from nothing, man, nothing. And he sent me a pay stub, and he said, I finally made over $200,000, and he's doing collision work.
Yeah.
And he is a good painter, and trust me, he put the work
pretty good for never going to school,
Yeah. And then,
but it's hard work. You're not sitting behind a desk, man. You're working.
It's a young man's game too.
It is a young man's game.
But he had a helper that I asked him, I said, what did your helper make? And he said, well, I don't know exactly. And I said, well, guess over or under $100,000. He goes, oh, he made more than $100,000. And I'm thinking, wow, I need to come out of retirement and get back into this collision game, this restoration.
I think I was getting paid like $6 or $8 an hour when I was a helper.
Yeah. It seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like if you're all about the money, and I'm not talking about hacking things up, but if you're all about the money, probably collision's the way to go. But if you're a car guy and you love cars and that's your passion, you can still make good money doing hot rods and restorations.
Yeah. I mean, I had a passion for it ever since. I mean, I started doing this stuff when I was like 17 years old.
Yeah.
In working in a body shop.
Yeah.
And I always had a passion for it, and I did well.
Yeah.
I did well at it. I certainly didn't make $1 million, and certainly never made $200,000 a year. But that was then. This is now. It's. Can you make that much now? Yeah, you probably can if you get in the right place.
Yeah. I mean, even at my old shop, we would do, let's say, a brake job.
Yeah.
And I'll make up some figures. The dealership wanted $2,000 to do this brake job.
Yeah.
Which was crazy. And we would we'd replace every part, calipers, rotors, pads. We're not turning, we're doing everything, the best parts. We do it for $1,000. And we would still make good money, $100 an hour or more. And we would do those because I couldn't imagine watching one of my friends or somebody I know pay $2,000 for a brake job back in the day. And then, we would make all this money, but yet I'd go work on this old, Mustang or Camaro and stuff. And instead of making $100 an hour doing brakes, I'd make 10 or 20 or 15 or whatever. But like you said, it was the passion. I always loved it.
You enjoyed doing it.
Yeah. It was, I didn't need alcohol or drugs because I already had an addiction.
Still got to make a living though.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if you noticed it. I don't know if the camera picks it up, is that You know, we got a bunch of automotive signs here in the background, Autorama, you know, this and that. But we got this sign with this gold-looking Chevy truck. Does that truck look familiar to you?
Yeah.
So what's the story behind that guy?
Well, I was out in Arizona back in 2002, and I wanted an old truck. So I went shopping, and I found that one. And it was a daily driver for a guy who was using it as his work truck, and I can't even remember what the hell I paid for it. It was like $3,800 or something like that, and it was running, driving, had a 6-cylinder stick shift, the old 6-volt charging system, and so I had it shipped back to Michigan, and I drove it probably for a year like that, and then started tearing it apart, and it was one of those deals where I just wanted a nice driver, and then shit got out of hand. And
what is it, a 54 Chevy
it's
truck?
a 54 Chevy, yeah.
Okay. Is it the, what kind of window did it have in it? Was it the 3 window or the 5 window?
It was
whatever?
a 3 window.
Okay.
Yeah, it didn't have the windows in the cab corners, but
okay. So what'd you end up doing to it?
man, I ended up.
You said it got carried away.
Well, I had another car that I sold, and I made pretty good money on it. So now it was like game on, and I ended up buying a chassis for it, a Fat Man chassis, and then I bought a 502 crate motor, and then I got this crazy idea to start polishing the aluminum heads in the intake, and it got to where I literally polished every single nut and bolt. There's all stainless steel, and I was too cheap to buy the ones that were already done, so I bought all the nuts and bolts, all the hardware, and I ground all the markings off and I probably had 4,000 or 5,000 hours into that truck.
That truck is gorgeous, though.
Yeah, I made the color. It had a custom mixed gold. It was not a tri-coat, but it looked like a tri-coat candy. But so I made the color, had the interior all done, and basically I think I did probably 85, 90%. The only thing I didn't do on that car or that truck myself was the interior and the exhaust.
It's funny.
Everything else I did.
Because PPG will put out, like, you know, a calendar or some kind of banner like that. And a lot of people say, oh, of course they're going to use his truck because he worked for PPG. And it's like, no, that's not why they put that truck.
Yeah, it was a pretty nice truck.
I remember, and maybe if we can, we'll put some pictures of this truck, because it doesn't do it justice. I remember you had your laptop and we were talking about engines and stuff, and you go, oh, I got this 502 and I got it mocked up in my 54 Chevy, and you showed me a picture of it, and it looked like like it was fake. Like it really did not look real. Like it looks like it's AI or it like was a cartoon. like. And I've been around cars my entire life, and I'm kind of looking at it, and I'm like, what the hell am I looking at here? And it's amazing, like the craftsmanship.
I smoothed out the block. I just went stupid on it.
I mean,
I'll never do that again.
Never say never.
I'll never do that again. I mean,
yeah, I definitely that's one of my favorite trucks, and it's funny because if you would come to me and say, hey, I want to paint this truck and I want to go gold, that's ugly, that's an ugly color. But I mean, on that vehicle, like the shape of it and the stance, it's some colors look good on some vehicles and look horrible on others. It's weird how that works, but that color is just gorgeous on that vehicle.
Yeah.
Especially when you see it in real life, Speaking of colors and stuff, so obviously you're a painter, you're a trainer, you've been all around the world, you met like all these big name guys and seen a lot of cars. I mean, everyone knows who like the Chip Foose and Troy Trepanier and the Ken Diggett or Dave Kendig, I should say, or even the Ring brothers. There's a lot of big names out there who, in no particular order, who's a couple builders or painters that you've always like kind of followed or respected or were in awe of their work in the past or now?
Well, I mean, I'm friends with Charlie Hutton, and to me, he's probably one of the best out there. As far as he'll tell you he's more of a detail guy than he is a painter, but the dude can paint. You know, I mean, look, everything he's painted, he's got like 7 or 8 Riddler awards under his belt.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And that's because he's that good. You know, obviously, Foose. You know, Foose is a big influence. But you know, some of the older guys, you know, Watson, you know, those type guys are in Larry Watson. So there's a lot of good painters out there. To say who's the best painter, who knows?
Yeah,
you
it's
know,
like who's the best baseball player.
Yeah, you know, I mean, there's a lot of really good guys, a lot of good builders and painters out there.
Yeah. I always liked Herschel Jr. Conway. He was always, you know, the guy who painted the Hirohito Mercury and all that.
Yeah.
He was just something about him. And then before, when Charlie worked for Boyd Coddington, before him was a guy named Greg Merrill.
Yeah.
And Greg Merrill actually painted Cadzilla.
Yeah.
And him and John Kosmowski, the guy who owned House of Color, developed the color for it. And I just remember as a kid, like reading that Hot Rod magazine and like seeing that car, I was just blown away. I mean, it wasn't real, you know. It just kind of blows my mind. So you're right. There are a lot of good guys out there.
Yeah.
Well, hey, we appreciate you coming on.
Right.
Definitely, I would like to jump into maybe a little bit deeper knowledge of paint and body at a later date, but we're wrapping up. But I want to appreciate everybody watching. I want to thank Jeff Matauch for coming on, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Wow, you made it to the end of the video. Thank you so much. If you like what we're doing here, go ahead and click a like. You can follow us. In the future, we're going to release more videos, all on automotive content, so look for us in the future. Thanks for watching.